if you are a husband, and a father, or if you're planning on becoming those things, then having an understanding of your proper duty towards your family is of the utmost importance, and the type of love and sacrifice that is being asked of you, and truly grasping that is really the only way to have true happiness in this life, if that is the mission you've been called to. And many times we hear about Saint Joseph in the sense of him being almost kind of an old, feeble man. And really, that isn't the case. I'd encourage you to read Consecration to Saint Joseph, The Wonders of Our Spiritual Father, by Father Donald H. Calloway. And I just want to read an excerpt from this, because Father goes on extensively here about how Saint Joseph could not have been an older man, but I just want to read you one paragraph about that. A man charged with guarding a territory from the intrusion of every foe needs to be a physically powerful man, not an elderly man requiring a cane. Like a powerful cherub dedicated to the protection and service of the Queen of Angels, Saint Joseph was given the task of guarding the temple of Mary's body, and in particular her virginity. Mary's guardian had to be young and strong in order to successfully fulfill his mission. An elderly man would probably not have the strength to guard a young wife. Neither would an elderly man be likely to have the stamina needed to raise an infant son. Saint Joseph's manhood was a protective shield, a protective cloak for the Blessed Virgin. No man or beast could do any harm to the Virgin, because Saint Joseph stood attentive and ready to defend her, even to the point of death. As men that are already in marriage, sometimes it can be difficult if your wife is not Catholic. Perhaps you had a reversion experience, you've come back to the church. That's exactly what happened to me. My wife was not Catholic, but if you love her the way Christ loves the church, and you care for her the way Saint Joseph cared for the Holy Family, then eventually her heart will open, and she will see the goodness and love of Jesus Christ through you. And that type of attraction to eternal truth is not something that is easily dismissed, especially when you are a woman in the marriage and you see a change that's profound in your husband, that you perhaps, your husband was a good man. I was a good man, as good as a man could be, that was living really a sinful life, but I hadn't fallen into extremely severe disorders. Certainly disorder enough that was grave sin that would send my soul to hell. But by society's standards, I was a nice guy. And so a metanoia comes over you, a change comes over you when you return to the church. And that is essentially what happened to me. And that love that your wife will see, at least through you initially, she will see through the church eventually. At some point, and never harp on these things, but ask her to join you occasionally, if she would like to join you at Mass. And sometimes, when somebody says no repeatedly, especially for long periods of times, and of course you love this person and your family and you want the best for them, and this is the best, it can be difficult. So certainly don't give up. Stay patient in prayer and stay loyal to Christ and continue to go to Mass. But I've been through this. I've personally been through this. And so I can speak to it to a degree. in regards to the type of love that can open up a woman's heart to the church, I believe the Sacred Heart devotion is very powerful, and it's certainly something to investigate and look into if you are a man in a marriage or that is about to be married. Either way, whether your wife is Catholic or not. But certainly, if you're already married and you're looking for that conversion in your wife, the Sacred Heart devotion is very powerful. And really, the Sacred Heart is what brought my wife into the church. I had been going back to Mass for quite a while, and there was one day I finally convinced my wife to come with me, because she had been to Mass with me in the past at the new rite of Mass. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but it wasn't necessarily speaking to her. And the sermons, oftentimes, depending on the type of priest you have, some are very liberal. And so you're not hearing anything that really convicts your soul, like, yes, I need to change. And you don't have that loving firmness, like, you need to come back to me, your Father. I love you, and this is where you belong. And so I convinced her to come with me to the Latin Mass, which I was attending in Fort Worth at the time. And she came with me, and she heard Father give a sermon on the Sacred Heart. And that sermon was so powerful to her that she began to cry during the sermon. And it was at that moment that she was ready to convert. God spoke to her. And so in the Middle Ages, the heart of Jesus became a specific object of adoration as the center and wellspring of Jesus' passionate and infinite love for us. The Sacred Heart also represents the woundedness of Jesus' heart, both physical and also on the cross by the centurion's spear, right? But it wasn't just physical in that sense. It was physical, but also it was a spiritual womb of love for us. It was so great. He gave up his life for us, even while his love is scorned by those for whom it was generously given. And so, I think back to how many times I scorned his love. So certainly, if you ever did that, have patience for those in your life that you love, because Jesus was patient with you. St. Gertrude always wondered why St. John never wrote about God's great love for us through the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And St. John appeared to her in a vision, and he said that he knew about that love, and his soul was penetrated with the sweetness of the Sacred Heart to its very center. And he explained to her that he did not write about it because his mission was to write of the eternal Word. But the language of the blissful pulsations of the Sacred Heart was to be reserved for the later times, the times that we're in right now. That when it was spoken about, the time-worn world, grown cold in the love of God, may be warmed up by hearing of such mysteries. And so that's exactly what happened to my wife. We don't know how cold and disconnected from God we've become. And so really understanding Christ's Sacred Heart is so important. In fact, there have been many scientists, and when I say many, many in the sense, as I think it's been around 3 or so, at least in modern times, that have converted, because when a Eucharistic miracle occurs, when they're consecrating the body, when they're consecrating the bread, which becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, Occasionally, that bread turns into real living flesh, right? After the consecration, once it's become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, you still see what looks like bread. And you're still consuming what feels and tastes like bread. But there are times when Jesus brings down that veil and allows us to see what's really there, that it's truly the flesh and blood of his heart. And there have been Eucharistic miracles where the church will bring these samples to scientists. And the scientists will study the samples of the heart tissue and they will convert on the spot because they can't grasp what they're seeing. Now, you could say, well, these scientists, they've been duped by the church. They could have gotten samples of cardiac tissue and tricked these scientists into it so that it makes the church look legitimate, right? Fair enough. But you know what? Jesus knew that people would have those doubts because we live in a twisted up time where everybody lies and really love has grown cold. But what happened? Those scientists, when they looked under their microscopes at the cardiac tissue, it was living cardiac tissue. And the cells were pulsating and beating as they would in a living heart. In fact, the samples they had underneath their microscopes were not dead, but they were alive. That's why those atheistic scientists that were brought these samples to confirm whether this was a miracle or not, or just some weird fungus, confirmed that it was indeed a miracle. And they converted to the church. God's literally giving us his body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. When Paul talks about not to go up in a state of what he's referring to really is mortal sin. He talks about going up in a state of anger against your brother, right? To receive your gift. He's speaking specifically about communion there. And he's saying that if you drink, and we know he's referring to communion because he says if you eat or drink unworthily, that you're liable to hell. So if you go up to communion in a state of mortal sin, you're guilty of God's blood. You're guilty of deicide. And so you have to go to confession first and be washed. Now, if you've done that in the past and you didn't know, you're not guilty. You didn't know. You can't be held accountable for something that was never taught to you. But make an effort then to get to confession immediately and have Christ's blood wash over you through that sacrament so that you can be pure when you go receive your gift at the altar, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. And when your wife sees this change in you, and I've been through it. I've been through all of it. I was not taught well by the men of the church at the time that I lived in as a young man. And so I fell through the cracks, and many of us fell through the cracks because there's been a grave diabolical disorder in the world. And I'll save that for another time. That specifically relates to liberalism, and perhaps I'll talk about that at length in a future episode. But really, I just want to conclude coming back to the fact that we are men who are married, have children, and we are expected to sacrifice as Christ did on the cross. And Saint Joseph was our living example of that playing out as he protected the Christ child and the Virgin Mother, who was a tabernacle for Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity. So amazing when you think about it. She's an eternal tabernacle. Most people don't appreciate that about the woman. Christ calls her woman. And people think, especially in the southern United States, many Protestants think, oh, well, he's referring to her like in a derogatory sense. He's kind of putting her down a little bit, like, know your place, woman. And can you imagine the Son of God, who's all love, saying that to his mother in that sense? No, absolutely not. This is an Old Testament reference to the woman. She is the tabernacle. She holds the living flesh, still body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. That's how closely she is related to him. You know, there is all women who have given birth to their children contain the living cells of those children in their uterus, in their body, until the day they die. She is still a living tabernacle. Would you say that one cell of Jesus Christ is not true God and true man? Of course it is. It really is. Just one cell. And so she is still that living tabernacle. This makes our job so important. Do you see what St. Joseph was protecting? In some sense, even though he was not a priest, he was the first priest in a certain sense. And we are the priests and the head of our homes, and we are expected to take care of, protect, and love our family. And so I want to conclude with a statement from Blessed Gabriel Allegra. Quote, "So what are you to gain from this wonder of St. Joseph? Are you required to believe that St. Joseph was young? No, you are not. But do you understand, at least based on the physical demands his mission would have inevitably placed on him, why it makes more sense that St. Joseph was young rather than old when he married Our Lady? Regardless of which depiction of St. Joseph you prefer, know that St. Joseph is your loving, strong, and fearless spiritual father. Thank him for all that he did out of selfless love for Jesus and your spiritual mother Mary. Thank him for all that he does for love of you." I thank you, O Holy Patriarch Joseph, because we who are incapable of even knowing how to love Jesus and our Immaculate Mother know and rejoice that you at least loved her as she deserved to be loved, the worthy and true Mother of Jesus. Be a man after the heart of St. Joseph. Love and protect your family, physically and spiritually. Pray for their conversions, pray for their reversions, treat them with love and respect, and they will see Jesus Christ's Sacred Heart manifest through you as his instrument. As men, we must die to ourselves. We must suffer, we must protect, but our crown awaits for us in heaven. God bless. We'll see you next time.